They said I was the lucky one marrying into a perfect family, but perfect families don't secretly block you on social media or create group chats without you. My sister-in-law smiled at me across the dinner table while leaking half-truths that made me look like a fraud. She thought I wouldn't notice. She thought I wouldn't fight back. What she didn't know was that I was quietly building something bigger than her curated life. And when the lights of Times Square lit up with my name, I knew I had taken back everything they tried to steal. When I first married Daniel, it felt like stepping into a photograph, a perfect glossy family portrait. His mother would host elaborate Sunday lunches, the kind with silverware polished to a mirror shine, and everyone spoke with polite warmth. Monica, his older sister, was the loudest cheerleader in the room. She would gush about my work as an art director, telling guests, "Sam has the most incredible eye for design. She could make a cereal box look like a gallery piece." I smiled, grateful but a little embarrassed, thinking I had found a sister I never had. In those early months, Monica went out of her way to include me. She brought me along to charity galas, introduced me to her network, and tagged me in her Instagram posts with captions like, "My brilliant sister-in-law." People told me how lucky I was to have such support from my husband's family. I believed them. I wanted to believe them. The first crack appeared on an unremarkable Tuesday evening. I was passing by the kitchen on my way to grab a glass of water when I heard her voice, low, conspiratorial, coming from the dining room. She was on the phone. "She's just a poster girl," Monica whispered, a hint of amusement in her tone. "Pretty enough to stand next to the product, but not actually the one doing the work." My hand froze on the refrigerator door. I told myself I'd misheard, that maybe she was talking about someone else. But the way she laughed, a short, dismissive laugh, lodged itself in my chest like a shard of glass. I started to notice things after that. How she would ask to see my latest project, only to take photos of my mock-ups. How she'd tell mutual acquaintances that my team handled everything, and I just approved the designs. I brushed it off, thinking maybe she didn't mean harm. I didn't want to start a war over something so subtle. Then, one morning, I opened my email to a forwarded rejection letter. It had Monica's name on it. She had applied for a creative director position at a boutique agency, using my portfolio. Every single piece, down to the typography choices, was mine. The polite but firm response from the agency thanked her for applying, but stated they had already reviewed these exact works under the rightful candidate's application file. The words "rightful candidate" burned into my brain. It wasn't just professional overreach, it was theft. And it confirmed what that overheard conversation had hinted at. Her kindness had been a costume. Weeks later, a casual conversation with one of my old colleagues revealed the deeper truth. Monica had once applied to the very same company where I worked now. She didn't just fail the interview, she hadn't even made it past the portfolio review stage. The rejection had stung so badly that she'd told people she turned the job down to pursue her own projects. Suddenly, her constant hovering over my career made sense. I wasn't family in her eyes. I was a rival who had taken the place she thought was hers. Monica had built her identity around being a power connector in the city. Someone who knew the right people, attended the right parties, had influence in the right circles. But the truth was far less glamorous. Most of her so-called connections were surface-level acquaintances, relationships she kept alive through social media optics. I learned she often borrowed ideas from others, repackaging them as her own. I started to see the cracks in her perfectly curated life, the quiet desperation under the champagne smiles. Then came the email. It was from a private address, not linked to any company I knew, and it was brief. "We've been following your work for years. We'd like to invite you to participate in a confidential large-scale art project with global reach. Details will be disclosed upon agreement." My heart pounded as I read it again and again. The invitation was unlike anything I'd ever received. There was no mention of money, no list of deliverables, just the promise of something global and confidential. It felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing the view on the other side could change everything. I didn't tell Daniel. I didn't tell anyone. The memory of Monica's theft was still raw, and I wasn't about to hand her another opportunity to slip her fingers into my work. I replied to the email, my fingers trembling over the keys, accepting the offer. For the first time since I'd married into the family, I felt like I was holding a card no one else at that dinner table could see. The morning after I accepted the mysterious offer, I posted a single photo on Instagram, my coffee cup, my laptop closed, and a caption that read, "Taking a break from the grind. Time to reset." I didn't add hashtags, didn't tag anyone. Within hours, my comments filled with faux concerned messages, Monica's among the first. "Rest is important, Sam," she wrote, followed by a private message. "If you need help finding something new, I have contacts." I could almost hear the smirk in her words. It wasn't a lie. I was taking a break from the visible grind. But behind closed doors, I was signing one of the most significant contracts of my life. The brand was massive, its name recognized across continents. They were launching a campaign unlike anything the industry had seen, and they wanted me to design its visual centerpiece. The catch: I had to keep it completely confidential until the reveal. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Monica was likely whispering to her circle that I was out of work, I was sketching concepts that would soon light up a skyline. It was the purest form of quiet revenge. No confrontation, no shouting matches, just the slow, deliberate build of something undeniable. Late at night, as I worked in my small studio, memories from another life began to resurface. I had once been the youngest creative director in Milan, overseeing campaigns for luxury brands that treated design like art. My life then was vibrant, frenetic, alive with possibility. And then I met Daniel. We fell in love quickly, too quickly maybe. I traded my job in Italy for a move to New York, convincing myself that marriage and stability would be its own kind of fulfillment. But the reality was messier. The move had been a quiet sacrifice I never fully acknowledged. Every time Monica hinted that I was lucky, Daniel supported me, it pressed against that old wound. I had chosen love over career once. I wouldn't make that mistake again. The project's scope demanded resources beyond what I had at my fingertips, so I began reaching out to my global network. Contacts from Milan, Paris, Tokyo, people I hadn't spoken to in years, were suddenly back in my orbit. I offered them small pieces of the project, never revealing the whole picture. The secrecy was intoxicating. One of my oldest collaborators, Aya from Tokyo, connected me with a digital artist whose projection work could transform a static billboard into a moving piece of art. From Milan, Luca sent over custom typography that carried the elegance of old-world craftsmanship. Every piece was a thread, and I was weaving them into something monumental. Still, I knew visuals alone wouldn't make this explode the way I wanted. It needed to be a moment, one that would detonate across social media the second it went live. That's when I reached out to a handful of influencers I trusted, all under burner accounts. They didn't know it was me. I told them I represented a confidential client and offered payment for being at a certain location at a certain time, phones ready, hashtags prepped. It was surgical. The kind of planning that left no trace back to me. And yet, there was a knot in my stomach every time I imagined the reveal. The truth was, when that moment came, Monica wouldn't just see my work. She would be publicly linked to it. People would remember her jabs, her dismissive comments, her curated superiority. The internet had a long memory, and it loved a good hypocrisy takedown. That's where the complication lay. I had to decide. Did I want to burn her in the process, or was I satisfied with simply winning? Public humiliation could spiral quickly, and once it started, I wouldn't be able to control where it landed. There was a difference between revenge and destruction. Some nights I'd sit in the quiet of my studio staring at the half-finished designs and wonder if I was becoming the very thing she thought I was. A manipulator, someone willing to leverage optics for personal satisfaction. But then I'd remember the sound of her voice that night in the kitchen, the rejection letter with my work attached, the way she'd smile at me like she owned the air between us. I didn't have an answer yet. All I knew was that the fuse had been lit, and when it reached the end, there would be light. Whether it illuminated or burned, I had yet to decide. The first thing I did after signing the final mock-ups was check Monica's calendar. She wasn't careful about hiding her big moments. She loved an audience too much. Her charity gala was scheduled for the first Friday in October, the kind of self-congratulatory event that pulled in every social climber she knew. I could almost see her in my mind. Sequined dress, champagne glass, cameras flashing. Perfect. That would be the night my campaign launched. Not before, not after. I told the brand my preferred date for the reveal, framing it as a strategic marketing window. They didn't question me. The timing made sense from a business perspective. But for me, it was more than strategy. It was choreography. 2 weeks before the gala, something unexpected happened. A satirical account on Twitter posted a screenshot of one of Monica's old Instagram captions. Some people think talent is owning a MacBook. The tweet had over 10,000 likes by morning. Within days, her past posts, subtle digs at women who marry up and designers who don't design, were turned into memes. People stitched her words into TikTok videos, reading them aloud over clips of over-the-top luxury, mocking her tone. I hadn't started it, but I didn't need to stop it either. While she was busy defending herself online, I continued working in silence. I imagined the collision, her big night, her polished image, and my work flooding Times Square just as the cameras turned her way. But Monica had a sharper instinct for self-preservation than I gave her credit for. A week before the gala, she called me. "I've been hearing things," she said lightly. "You've been busy?" Her tone was casual, but there was a needle under the silk. I lied easily, talking about small freelance gigs and nothing worth mentioning. She didn't buy it. 2 days later, I learned she'd hired a digital investigator, someone whose entire job was to dig through the internet's hidden corners, piecing together private deals from the faintest trails of data. It wasn't paranoia, it was hunting. For a moment, I considered scrapping the reveal date, but I didn't have to. The investigator found something, just not what Monica wanted. Instead of evidence against me, he stumbled upon her own questionable dealings, and he didn't report back to her. He sold it to one of her competitors in the charity circuit, a woman who had been trying to edge Monica out of her coveted event chair position for years. The news hit me like a plot twist I hadn't written. Monica's own plan was unraveling in someone else's hands, and I was suddenly a spectator to her slow fall. That's when the true enemy stepped into the light, not with a grand reveal, but in the quiet, off-handed way that made it more dangerous. Daniel's cousin, Claire, had been feeding Monica information about me for months. She positioned herself as my friend, the sympathetic ear at family dinners. But every detail I shared seemed to have found its way to Monica's mouth. Now she was working both sides, passing information to Monica while cozying up to one of my industry rivals. The realization felt like a cold weight settling in my chest. This wasn't just about Monica anymore. It was about a network. I wasn't fighting one person. I was fighting an ecosystem that thrived on quiet sabotage. Then, the blow I didn't see coming. 3 days before launch, the brand called. "We've decided to postpone the reveal," the project manager said, her voice taut. "Some concerns about market timing." I knew that was a polite way of saying something had spooked them. My stomach twisted. I could almost hear Monica's laughter in the silence after I hung up. This was her opening. Within hours, her Instagram was a parade of posts about taking risks and being fearless in your career. Thinly veiled jabs at my supposed absence from the scene. Friends texted to ask if I was okay. For the first time since the project began, I felt the ground tilt under me. The plan that had been so precise, so perfectly timed, was slipping through my fingers. And Monica, smelling blood in the water, was circling for the kill. The call from the brand postponing the launch could have been the end of it. Monica certainly thought so. But the thing about playing a long game is knowing your backup plans must have backup plans. I hadn't put all my weight on New York. Months earlier, I had signed a second contract, quietly, with a London-based luxury label. Their campaign was set to drop the same week, and their Billboard spot was none other than Piccadilly Circus. I'd kept the projects separate, using different teams, different contractors, even different design languages, so no one could trace them back to the same hand until I decided it was time. The London deal gave me something Monica couldn't touch. Another stage, another spotlight, one she didn't even know existed. My ace in the hole was a person, not a project. Vincent Hayes, my old mentor from Milan, now sitting on the New York Art Council. He wasn't just influential, he was untouchable in the art and design world. I'd reached out months ago, explaining my situation without naming names, and he'd offered his quiet support. When the Times Square brand got cold feet, Vincent stepped in. Within 48 hours, the launch was back on the calendar, now paired with the London reveal for maximum impact. If Monica wanted a spectacle, I was about to give her one she'd never forget. On the night of her gala, as guests in glittering gowns sipped champagne and photographers scrambled for shots, the lights of Times Square began to shift. A wave of deep color bled across the digital screens, morphing into the flowing typography I had commissioned from Luca. In London, the same transformation lit up Piccadilly Circus. Vincent had orchestrated a live stream that cut between the two cities in real time, broadcasting to an online audience primed by my network of anonymous influencers. Hashtags I'd seeded weeks before began trending within minutes. Phones in the gala hall lit up with notifications. Someone gasped. Then someone else whispered, "Is that Sam?" It wasn't just my name on the billboards, it was my signature, etched into the corner of the designs in a way no one could mistake. By morning, the internet had done what it does best, dig. Old posts of Monica's resurfaced, paired with side-by-side images of my work now dominating two of the most iconic advertising spaces in the world. Some people think talent is owning a MacBook was suddenly a punchline, quoted under my billboards like a battle trophy. Within hours, bloggers began connecting dots she thought she'd erased. Screenshots emerged of projects she'd claimed as her own in the past, projects that matched files from my old archives almost exactly. The narrative flipped so fast it made my head spin. Monica, the self-styled tastemaker, exposed as a fraud. Her phone must have been a minefield of missed calls and urgent messages. Brands quietly began distancing themselves, pulling her name from events. One of her biggest contracts was terminated by mutual agreement, though I knew that was just polite PR for we can't afford the scandal. I didn't gloat. I didn't post a single thing to feed the frenzy. I let the silence do the talking. Every headline, every viral post, every meme that carried my work and her downfall existed without me lifting a public finger. It was a strange kind of victory. Heavy, not sweet. Watching her image crumble didn't bring the rush I thought it would. Instead, it left me with a quiet certainty. I had won, and she knew it, even if I never said a word. At the gala's after-party, I saw her from across the room. The sequined dress still glittered under the lights, but her smile had shrunk tight around the edges. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. She looked away first. I didn't approach. I didn't need to. Some victories echo louder in restraint than in declaration. The morning after the dual billboard reveal, my inbox looked like a war zone. Hundreds of unread emails, countless notifications, and more calls than I could process. At first, it felt intoxicating, the validation, the reach, the sheer scope of it all. But the glow faded quickly. By the third day, the attention had curdled. Anonymous messages started sliding into my DMs. Some were backhanded compliments, others were pure venom. Hope you're proud of yourself. Destroying another woman's career. We know where you live. My assistant filtered what she could, but some slipped through, enough to keep me looking over my shoulder on the way home. Then came the articles. The first few celebrated the artistry of the campaign, but it didn't take long for the tone to shift. Calculated rivalry, how Sam Blake played the optics game, read one headline followed by another. Is this the end of humble talent? The stories framed me as a manipulator who had orchestrated Monica's downfall for personal gain. The facts were twisted until the narrative had teeth, and it bit hard. What stung wasn't just the misrepresentation, it was the way people ate it up. Strangers I'd never met debated my morality on Twitter threads and morning talk shows. To them, I wasn't a person. I was content. The fallout reached Daniel too. At first he brushed it off, laughing at the headlines, but I could see the shift when his colleagues began making jokes about him living under the Billboard or asking if he needed to book his wife's approval for lunch. He didn't say much at home, but the silence after dinner was heavier than any argument. One night, I walked into the kitchen and caught him staring at his phone, his jaw tight. "Is this worth it?" he asked, without looking up. It wasn't anger in his voice. It was weariness. And in that moment, I realized that while I'd been preparing for Monica's reaction, I hadn't considered the collateral damage. The first real fracture between us widened when I learned the truth about the industry storm brewing behind my back. Over lunch with a trusted contact, I heard the phrase that made my stomach knot. "You're just a piece on the board." The success of the dual launch hadn't just shaken Monica. It had rattled major players in advertising, agencies with more money, more influence, and more to lose. I wasn't the queen in this game. I was a pawn they'd noticed too late, and then I found out who was moving the pieces. His name was Alan Mercer, a creative director I'd crossed paths with years ago in Milan. We'd competed for a major luxury account, and I'd won. He'd been polite in public, but his grudge had been festering ever since. Mercer was the one quietly feeding the press their Sam the Schemer angle. He knew exactly how to position it so my victories looked like vendettas. I might have been able to weather even that if not for the betrayal that followed. My oldest friend in New York, Lila, someone who'd celebrated every milestone with me, was the source of Mercer's information. She had access to my schedules, my notes, my drafts, things I never imagined would leave her hands. When I confronted her, she didn't deny it. "It's just business, Sam," she said, her voice flat. "You've been in this game long enough to know loyalty is negotiable." The words hit harder than any of Monica's insults ever had. Monica had been an enemy from the start. Lila had been family. That night, I sat alone in my studio, the billboard still lit in 2 cities, my name still trending. But the victory felt hollow. I'd proven myself, yes. I'd outplayed Monica, yes. But the cost was high. Trust shattered, my marriage strained, my reputation twisted into a caricature. The lights outside my window blurred into indistinct shapes, and I realized the game wasn't over. It had just moved to a bigger board, and the players were more dangerous than I'd imagined. 2 weeks after the chaos peaked, an email landed in my inbox with the subject line, "Opportunity for the Bold." The sender was an agency known for its ruthless campaigns, brilliant, controversial, and unapologetically cutthroat. They wanted me to helm their next project, one that would push boundaries and shatter reputations. The budget was obscene, the kind of number that made accountants smile in their sleep. It was exactly the kind of offer people expected me to take. Another strategic strike, another high-profile win. I could already imagine the headlines, "Sam Blake strikes again." But as I stared at the proposal, I felt a hollowness in my chest. The last few months had been nothing but calculated blows and quiet counterattacks. Each one left me with less of myself. I closed the email. Then I deleted it. That night, I told Daniel over dinner. He studied me for a long moment before nodding. "Maybe you're tired of the fight," he said. It wasn't a question. He was right. The revenge had served its purpose. Now it was time for something that would outlast it. The idea came to me while walking through the Soho district, passing a pop-up gallery showcasing the work of a 22-year-old illustrator. Her pieces were raw, unpolished, but alive with potential. She reminded me of myself at that age, hungry but invisible. That's when the thought crystallized. What if I created a place for women like her to not only be seen, but to be supported from the ground up? Within a month, the blueprint for the Blake Creative Foundation took shape. The mission was simple but radical: to fund and mentor independent female creatives, bypassing the gatekeepers who thrived on exploitation and optics. I used the very networks I'd once guarded for my own projects to connect these women with clients, platforms, and audiences. The board of directors included artists, activists, and entrepreneurs who had each fought their own battles for legitimacy. It wasn't charity, it was infrastructure. The first major test came sooner than I expected. A luxury brand approached the foundation, offering $1 million contract for a global campaign. The catch: they had a history of exploiting unpaid interns and plagiarizing independent designs. The money could fund the foundation for a year, maybe more, but signing would mean aligning with everything we stood against. I spent a sleepless night weighing the choice. In the end, I turned it down. The brand's representatives were stunned. "Do you realize what you're walking away from?" they asked. I did, and it felt like freedom. Word of the rejection spread. To my surprise, it didn't hurt us. It galvanized support. The decision became a statement that attracted the right kind of partners, the ones who valued integrity over spectacle. Slowly, my role in the industry began to shift. I was no longer just a designer. I was a reformer, nudging the standards toward transparency, pushing agencies to credit collaborators, to pay fairly, to drop the smoke and mirror tactics. There was resistance, of course, but the tide had started to turn. Even Monica wasn't immune to the change. She disappeared from the public eye for a while after her contracts dried up, but months later, I heard she'd launched a small interior design studio. No staged photo ops, no inflated client lists, just real work. I didn't reach out, and she didn't either. But when I stumbled across one of her projects in a design magazine, I felt something unexpected: relief. Maybe we'd both grown tired of the performance. The foundation's first annual showcase was held in a converted warehouse in Brooklyn. The space was buzzing with journalists, collectors, and art lovers. The centerpiece was a towering digital billboard screen at the far end of the hall, cycling through the work of our inaugural grant recipients. When the lights dimmed for the final reveal, the screen filled with a piece so striking it drew a collective breath from the crowd. It wasn't mine. It belonged to a young woman named Aria, a self-taught artist from Detroit whose work blended street art and digital animation in a way that felt like the city itself was breathing. Her name appeared in bold letters beneath the design, not mine. That was deliberate. I stood at the edge of the crowd, watching her shake hands with gallery owners and potential clients, her eyes wide with disbelief. This was the win I'd been chasing all along. Not the applause, not the headlines, but the act of clearing a path for someone else to step into the light. When the event ended, I stepped outside into the cool night air. Across the street, a smaller version of Aria's piece played on a rented billboard, visible to anyone passing through the neighborhood. The glow from it reflected in the puddles on the asphalt, fractured, but still bright. I thought about the first billboard, the one in Times Square, the one that had started this cascade. Back then, it had been about proving something, to Monica, to the industry, maybe even to myself. But this was about leaving something behind that didn't need my name to stand. The city hummed around me, indifferent and alive. Somewhere, Monica was building her own version of a second act. Somewhere, Mercer was likely plotting his next move. Somewhere, another young woman was sketching in a dim apartment, wondering if anyone would ever see her work. I couldn't control all of that, but I could keep building. And maybe, if I did it right, the game would change enough that those coming after me wouldn't have to play it the same way I did.